and welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I wish I could see all your smiling faces, but I'll just envision them in my brain. Thank you to Cornell Master Gardeners for hosting this program and for everything you do for educating and improving our natural world and for improving gardening in our world and supporting our ecosystem. I first got into the whole native plant movement, if it is a movement, about 25 years ago when I heard Doug Tallamy talk. I'm sure most of you know who he is. This book was life-changing for me. And Doug made the connection between plants and insects and understanding that most of the insects in our part of the world are specialists. They can only eat one or two species of plants. If those plants aren't here, the population of insects falls. And if the population of insects falls, the population of birds falls because birds need insects, especially caterpillars, to feed their babies. And in fact, that has all happened in the last, well, since 1970, we have lost almost 1/3 of all of the birds in North America. And that includes all of our favorite backyard birds. In fact, those have been the most hard hit species, orioles and warblers and meadowlarks and all of the birds that we like to see are disappearing and their populations are falling. And the reason for that is largely within our own control. As I walk around my neighborhood, this is what I see. This is a type of landscape I call nothing to eat and nowhere to hide. This is not a landscape that supports insects or birds or butterflies or any of the wildlife that we value. So I became passionate and started reading everything I could get my hands on, attending courses, lectures, seminars, and planting. I started planting native plants, and I have planted thousands of native plants and probably killed hundreds. My friend Larry Weiner says, you don't really know a plant until you've killed it at least 3 times. And that may very well be true. Certainly in my case, I've learned what works where. And the most important thing to know before you plant anything is whether you've got the right plant in the right place. With all of this, I have tried to capture what I've been learning on a blog, and I'm going to refer you to it because I think it will help as I go through the discussion on native plants. This is the website for the homepage for the Nature Center at Greenberg. Here's the URL site, naturecentergb.org. There on that website, I have my blog called Around the Grounds. And the most useful thing, I think, is that if you check out the bottom, it refers to the index. If you click on that, you can find an index of all of the blogs that I've written. There are almost 100 of them now over the last several years. And these are in chronological order, so they have a numerical listing, but then it tells you the plant that's mentioned or discussed in the blog with the common and Latin name, and then my extremely clever titles for all of those blog posts. Most of them can be read in less than 5 minutes. And I researched them to death, so you can be pretty confident that the information in there is correct. I haven't been caught out in a big mistake yet, so I'm pretty sure that what I have in there is right. I think we should probably start the rest of this discussion with a definition of what is native. Because there's a lot of debate about that. Generally, everybody agrees that native plants are the plants that were here in North America before the first European colonists arrived, bringing all the plants they brought over the next several hundred years. However, you can be a native plant purist and say that you will only plant those things that are native to your particular ecozone, which is the specific here, southern Westchester County. Or you can take a somewhat broader view, which is what I do, because I think the alternative is that lawn and non-native shrub landscape we just saw. If I can persuade people to plant shrubs, perennials, grasses, trees that are native to a somewhat broader zone where I know they will prosper, and where the insects that we have here can use them and the birds can use them, then I think that works for me. So I generally define native as plants that are native, originated, evolved in the northeastern United States, up into Canada, south probably as far as Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey, into the Carolinas, and occasionally a little bit south of that. Very rarely west, but sometimes into the Great Plains, because our prairies used a lot of the same plants that were found in the Great Plains and in the Great Lakes region. If a plant is not strictly native to our spot here in southern Westchester County, I'll mention that for those of you who are more strict in your definition of native. So why do we love native shrubs in particular? In my view, shrubs have the magic characteristic of low maintenance, for real. I think they require far less work than lawn, than non-native shrubs, than perennials, even than trees, particularly because they evolved here. And so they don't need protection like this from our standard winters. It just kind of makes me scrunch up my nose to walk around the neighborhood and see people covering their winter interest plants with burlap because those plants don't hold up to our perfectly normal winter. So our native plants evolved to tolerating those conditions, and even our native insects, because either they host a few species of insects, in which case they're used to dealing with those insects, or they have defenses against the vast array of other insects, except for the invasive ones that have come in on plants from other parts of the world. This is a good example of why native shrubs are lower maintenance. On the right here is an Asian mophead hydrangea, was in my garden, and on the left is our native oakleaf hydrangea. In this particular year, we had an ice storm in early April. The ice storm killed off the flower buds and many of the early leaves on the Asian hydrangea. So this picture taken in the second week of May, you can see that the Asian hydrangea is still struggling, but it did eventually leaf out, but no flowers. Whereas the native hydrangea is just happy as it can be, and it bloomed as it always does, perfectly normally. So most of our native shrubs also need minimal or zero fertilizer. An occasional dressing of compost is always welcome, but I don't put the chemical or nitrogen fertilizers on shrubs because those are salty and they tend to make shrubs actually more attractive to deer. If you use compost, that is less of a factor. Most of our native shrubs don't need to be pruned. I see this on my regular morning dog walk. One of my neighbors fertilizes all of the shrubs, waters all of the shrubs, and then religiously clips off all of the new growth to make them into, I don't know what you call this, tidy geometric shapes. You can see the hedge is clipped, even the top of the tree is clipped, and everything else is more or less flat top or ball shaped. Why do that if you could instead have a landscape that looks like this? Here, these are shrubs and perennials and trees that I planted at this point almost 20 years ago. And they have never been pruned. Over here, we have oaks in the background, a hemlock, inkberry. Over here, we have a calycanthus and a bottle brush buckeye, sorry. Then I have a native hydrangea, globe arborvitae, and a whole row of blueberries under here. And I do nothing to these plants. And everything else in here are perennials. The stuff in the front tolerates salt, ice, snowplows, everything. So in my view, the native shrubs are the lowest maintenance plants in my landscape. It doesn't mean they have to be very loose and formal. They can also be tidy, and they don't have to be loose and informal. They can be also tidy and more formal. This is a foundation planting we did at the Nature Center at Greenberg, really as an example to show homeowners how they can landscape foundation plantings with all native plants. An Alberta spruce in a container. We have a dwarf white pine. We have a St. John's wort, viburnum nudum. We'll be talking about those shrubs in a minute. And it makes a very manageable, attractive, tidy, and pretty much zero maintenance foundation planting. The other thing I love, these are inkberries that are also on the patio at the Nature Center that have been there for about 10 years and have never been pruned, but maintain a graceful and elegant shape. The other thing we really love about native plants is they give us a sense of seasons. Most of us like living in a place with a change of seasons, but as you go around suburban neighborhoods, look at houses and see if it weren't for the pumpkins, could you really tell what season this is? Not from the shrubs, maybe from the leaves on the grass. How about this one? You could not tell what season this is. Is it April? Maybe July with a dead tree? This photograph was actually taken a few years ago on December 29th. Note the bamboo on the side, the vast open space of lawn, and one cherry tree that hasn't bloomed yet. With a native landscape, you can tell what season it is, and you can enjoy watching plants change with the seasons. This is a front walk in spring. This is the same walk in the fall. This is that foundation planting at the Nature Center in midsummer. This is the same planting in October. This is my side yard in spring, my front yard in fall, November. So there's a lot of excitement when the seasons change because you don't have to go to Vermont leaf peeping to see changing seasons if you actually plant native shrubs in your own yard, and they provide that sense of season and pleasure for you. Native shrubs also give us a sense of place. This landscape could be anywhere. It could be in Ohio, it could be in the Florida Panhandle, it could be in Oregon, but it's right here around the block in Westchester County. Same thing here. If you plant with lawn and annuals that you buy at a big box store, there's no sense of place because those same plants are sold all over the country and don't change. Whereas a landscape like this could only really be in the northeastern United States. We have a wooded area with oaks, fothergilla, native azaleas, viburnum, rhododendron, hydrangea. This is where we live, and the plants should reflect this place. That can also be true in a formal garden with ferns that are native to this place. The shrubs around here are all native, and it gives you a sense that you're in a garden in New York. These native shrubs mix well with other plants. Here I have them with ornamental grasses, with perennials, with trees, with the crabapple. And here we have a whole variety of native shrubs that completely block the view of a fence and an adjoining property. With native shrubs, you can actually have a privacy screen that's not just a row of arborvitaes or privet. You can have a privacy screen that you actually enjoy watching throughout the year that still gives you the sort of privacy that you want. But most important of all, of course, is why we value native shrubs, and that's for their wildlife value. We have plants that are vital resources of pollen and nectar for bees, butterflies, that provide berries for birds, and shelter from the storm all winter long. And there are so many great native shrubs. You don't have to sacrifice anything in terms of beauty or pleasure or ease of care to use native shrubs. In fact, I think they're they're far better. So choosing my favorites here to talk to you about this morning was not easy. I've narrowed it down, but I'm going to go through these pretty fast. So with each one, I will try to mention the blog post number by number that you can find on the Nature Center's website for more information and more photos. All of the plants that I'm going to talk about now are plants that I've had a lot of experience with. I've grown all of these for 10 plus 15 maybe years. They're all easy to grow. They're mostly deer resistant. Maybe one or two, I'll tell you, are a little more vulnerable to deer. They all have a lot of seasonal interest. In fact, most of them have 3 seasons of interest, and will always help you know what time of year it is. I decided to go because it's spring and we're all probably desperate in order of bloom season. So that's what we'll do. So the first thing to bloom in my garden is Amelanchier. Amelanchier goes by a bunch of common names that really tell you what its history is. You may know it as serviceberry. When colonists were first in the northeastern United States and they saw this tree bloom or shrub bloom, they would know pretty soon their itinerant ministers would be able to get out and start performing services like baptisms, marriages, and funerals in the more remote areas. It's really the harbinger of spring and an easier season. The flowers on this shrub are incredibly important for early pollinators because it's one of the first things to bloom. The bees that emerge more earlier in the season desperately need the pollen and nectar from Amelanchier. This shrub is also the host plant for 124 species of caterpillars of moths and butterflies that feed on the leaves for Amelanchier. That said, I've never seen any messed up leaves or any damage to this plant that makes it unattractive. One of the other names for this plant is Juneberry, and this is why. The fruit of this plant are extremely delicious. I pull them off, but I almost never can get to them before the birds do. This is a mockingbird, but blue jays, cardinals, robins hit this plant, and they always seem to think that the berries are ripe a day or two before I think they are. But I still try to get as many as I can and eat them by the handful. They look like sort of like red blueberries, but they taste a little bit more like raspberries, a little seedy, and they ripen slowly over the time that over time. So they never made a good commercial crop, but it makes a great landscape shrub. Almost any yard can handle an Amelanchier. In a tree form, Amelanchier arborea, it's taller, maybe 25 feet tall, single trunk, but very light and airy, so it never casts very much shade. You can always plant under it. I like the shrub form better because I get a better berry production from that, and it's a little lower. After probably 20 years, mine is about 15 feet tall and maybe 5 or 6 feet wide with multiple trunks, but really a fantastic plant that belongs in anybody's yard. And the blog post that discusses Amelanchier is blog number 26, so there's more information there. The fall color on Amelanchier is like this. However, I will note one thing, that in hot, dry summers, it tends to drop its leaves early, not too long after the berries appear. So by August, there may not be a lot of leaves left on the tree. The next shrub I want you to know about is, I think, way underused in our region. It's not technically native to southern Westchester, but it is actually a little bit farther south, more the Virginia, Carolina, southeastern kind of a plant. And that is called Fothergilla gardeniae, or dwarf fothergilla. The common names for it don't make any sense to me. Somebody calls it mountain witch alder. I'll just call it Fothergilla. It is an absolute killer shrub, and I'm willing to have people use it even though it's not technically native here, because it is a great substitute for burning bush. instead of burning bush that only does its one thing with the bright colored leaves for a week or two in the fall, this plant starts out like this. Here it's flowers. There's a crabapple here, and down here is a row of Fothergilla that I've planted on the edge of a lawn. You can actually make a hedge out of it. It only gets to be about 3 to 4 feet tall. This one has been there a long time. Maybe it's 4.5, 5 feet tall. In the summer, after it finishes blooming, you can see the finished flowers here. It just makes a nice rounded shrub that you can plant really anywhere. I have it here in a shady garden with some big ferns and under an oak tree. It has the leaves are a fresh green color, stay beautiful all summer long. And then in the fall, it does this. And the color in the fall changes from year to year. It can be gold, pink. You can have all the fall colors on one plant. And it does this sometimes. Actually, this last fall, that was the color it did for me. The color in the fall is a little bit better, I think, in full sun, but I have it in part shade, as I said, on one side yard, and it blooms and colors up very beautifully in the fall. I have never seen deer touch it, and I've never fertilized it. I've never pruned it. It's a good shrub for smaller properties because it really never gets much bigger than, as I say, 3 to 4 feet tall, maybe 2 to 3 feet wide. I have more information in blog number 6 on Fothergilla, so make a note of that one. And then I want to give a plug to our native azaleas. I don't have a blog post on these, and my hesitation with them is they're not completely deer resistant. If you plant them around a lot of other aromatic shrubs or in an area close to the house or someplace fenced, they're totally worth it. But I have seen deer nibble them, not enough to kill them, but to sort of prune them. But this is sort of a personal favorite of mine. Our non-native azaleas are so common in this part of the area. Every spring you see hedges of the Asian azaleas in bright garish colors. Most people prune them really hard. They bloom really hard for a week, maybe 2, and then all of those flowers that have bloomed out at once turn into little crispy brown husks, and the shrub just looks kind of crummy for the next month. And then people prune them hard. I only had pest control on one plant in my property, and that was my non-native azaleas, because they were being hit by azalea lacewing, which was a non-native insect, an invasive insect. And after a while, I realized that was wrong-headed, so I just removed the non-native azaleas. Now I use 0 pesticide on my property and really don't have any pest problems because the birds eat all of these insects. So this is one of the native azaleas in the background here. It's just starting to bloom. This is in the shade garden on the side of my driveway. Deer do go through here, but they really haven't bothered them. I get the native azaleas confused, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is the Prenophyllum. All of these azaleas are in the rhododendron family. So when you see them in the nursery, it'll say rhododendron Prenophyllum. Oof, I can't even say that one. Common name, pink rose shell azalea, I think. This blooms early, and those big, beautiful pink flowers like this. All of our native azaleas are deciduous, which is one reason they're less popular. Some of them tend to be tall and lanky, a little bit twiggy. They drop their leaves in the fall, and so they are not planted as often as the non-native azaleas, which remain evergreen, but they are so worth it. Because this one, for example, this is swamp azalea. Those flowers, every single one of them they smell like cloves. And as you walk past this plant, there's just this incredible fragrance, which the Asian azaleas do not have at all. The flowers have these long tubular things, which make Hummingbirds approach them, and these are full of nectar. So butterflies drink from these. They fit in really well with other plants. It's called swamp azalea. I planted them in a rain garden, but I've also planted them in perfectly normal garden soil, and they do great. This one is called pinkster shell azalea. It's in the garden in a perfectly normal soil, part shade. And this one, by the way, blooms in June. The first one blooms in late April, early May. This one blooms in June, and get this one blooms in August. An azalea that blooms in August. It's called plumleaf azalea. I found it at Rosedale Nursery after seeing it on Wildflower Island at Teatown. And it's an endangered plant in its native habitat, which is in the South. I think it's worth saving an endangered plant by planting it where it will grow here. So I do, and it's a killer. Who is used to seeing an azalea bloom in August? So it's a pet favorite of mine, and I do recommend it. Another one, this starts blooming in early May, red buckeye. This is another plant that is native a little farther south, sort of in the mid-Atlantic region down to the southeast. I have a blog post, blog number 71, about buckeyes. The red buckeye opens first. It gets to be about 8 to 10 feet tall, has sort of an open, loose shape, likes part shade. So I have it here under hemlocks. It gets afternoon sun, but dappled sun. And you can see why it got the nickname the firecracker plant. It's just flame red, so it packs a real punch coming out of a shaded area like that. And just as it starts to fade, the bottlebrush buckeye or white buckeye starts blooming. So here in this garden, I have the red buckeye on the back because it gets taller, gets to be 8 to 10 feet tall, kind of a rangy, loose shape. And the white buckeye is much more mounded. It's wider than it is tall, gets to be maybe 5 feet tall, but wider, and it starts blooming later. So it's more like July, and it gets these really weird flower buds that stick up like stalks, and then it opens up to this. Butterflies go crazy, and at the end of the season, it develops what the buckeye, which is a round nut shaped thing, which is actually eaten by squirrels and maybe in its native habitat, bigger rodents than we have here. And blog numbers 51 and 89, I talk about the next thing that blooms in my garden. And if you have a place for this, I just can't say enough about it. Our native hydrangea, oak leaf hydrangea. Quercifolia means oak leaf. And this plant it blooms for so long, you just will be astonished. If you don't know it already, I really urge you to find it and try it. Its only negative is that it does get big. It can be 8 to 10 feet tall and wide, and it grows fairly fast. It can be pruned. You can trim it in August to keep it, I wouldn't make it into a ball shape, but you can trim it back so that it occupies whatever space you do have for it. In mid-June, it starts blooming with these big cone-shaped flowers. The white petals here, these little 4-petal flowers, hide the true flowers. The 4-petaled flowers are basically false flowers that are advertising for bees, and it works. The advertising works. The bees come in because the true flowers under here are basically just a tight bundle of stamen loaded with pollen. So the bees come in, and as they fertilize those interior flowers, seed is produced along this whole flower, and the birds will eat those seeds all winter long. So the flower changes from these big white cone-shaped flowers to this pinkish flower. And this picture now is taken in August. By September, the flowers turn sort of rust-colored and hang out on the plant, still looking beautiful. And then in October, it does this. The oak leaves are called that because they're that shape, but they also color up and offer incredible fall color. So if you have this planted, as I do here, in front of winterberry, hemlock, or white pine, other native evergreen, it's just a dramatic show. The flowers hang around here, still looking pretty cool, and the leaves are just unbelievable. And you don't get any of that if you plant Asian mophead hydrangeas. The one I showed you that was struggling in the spring after an ice storm was here when I moved in. It's still here, but I don't really value it the way I do the native hydrangea because it has been cultivated to only have the 4-petal outside flowers. It doesn't have the real flowers on the inside. So there's zero value for bees on this flower. The same thing is unfortunately true about our other native hydrangea, smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens, which has now been manipulated by horticulturists to also get rid of all of the valuable internal flowers. This is the one so many gardeners know as Annabelle, and it makes these enormous floppy white flowers that people just go nuts for, but bees don't, because there's nothing in there for bees. So I would rather have oak leaf hydrangea, and I would urge you to consider that. In blog 89, which I wrote only a few months ago, I do note that some non-native hydrangeas, some Asian hydrangeas, have a lace cap flower, and those, ironically, are loaded with pollen in the true flowers because they're not this big ball shape. So there is actually more value in this case to bees from the non-native lace cap flowers than there is from our native Annabelle. Next plant I want to talk to you about is one of my very, very favorite viburnums. We have 4 native viburnums in our region. This one is by far my favorite. Its Latin name is Viburnum nudum, which I have on the slide. It's also known as smooth witherrod, or I can't remember. There are other common names for it, but if you go shopping for it, ask for Viburnum nudum. There's a cultivar called Winter Thur that is great. And this plant I use as a foundation plant. It's here in front of my house, and it makes these white flat flowers in the spring that are loaded with pollen. All of those are stamens. So this attracts bees and nourishes bees. When those are pollinated, they turn in late summer to these incredible berries, pink berries that gradually also turn blue. So you get pink and blue berries on the same plant, and then the fall color starts. So here are 3 Viburnum nudum planted together in front of my house. This one in the back is still green, and this is now in September or October. This one is sort of purple, and then the one in front has got orange and red and still some green on it. So pretty dazzling display of fall color. These get to be 4 to 6 feet tall, definitely prunable if you want to keep them a little bit tighter, and they'll fill out a little bit more at the bottom if you keep them from getting too rangy. Although the ones I planted in front of the manor house at the nature center at Greenberg have been in one place unpruned and are still only maybe 6 feet tall. They get to be about 3 to 4 feet wide, and the birds continue to work on these berries, which turn black and start looking like raisins. This is now in late November, and the leaves will fall, and those berries will stay on there, and the birds will work on those berries all winter long. So it's an important food source there. I have written a lot about Viburnum nudum because I love it. And so blogs number 7 and 83 will tell you more about that plant. Then one of the most fun plants you can possibly have in your garden is a foundation plant in a sunny border, a plant that tolerates hot, dry areas. So you can plant this right along a walkway that reflects heat back. This species, Hypericum prolificum, also known as shrubby St. Johnswort, is native here in southern Westchester, but there are 2 more closely related species. One is called Hypericum frondosum, and that looks very much like this. And there's a cultivar called Sunburst. It makes these big sort of pom-pom flowers surrounded by petals, and every single one of those little feathery things is covered with pollen. So bumblebees come in here and they load up their pollen sacs, and they do something that's called buzz pollination. They wade into the flower and then they just like shake their whole body and shake all the pollen off of the all these stamens, so that it comes onto their face and their front legs, and then they push it all off and they put it back onto their hind legs to those pollen sacs. And let me just tell you, it never gets old watching that. It's just entertainment. These things bloom in midsummer, July. They love hot, dry weather. And I have seen bumblebees, as you walk up to the plant in July, you can actually hear the plant humming because there'll be so many bumblebees on it. We planted it, and yeah, the bumblebees are so obsessed with the pollen, they never bother anybody. I have waded in to, pull off a leaf from some other plant in there, or to get my camera close enough to take these pictures, and the bumblebees are completely oblivious. They're obsessed with the pollen and will not bother anybody. There is a cultivar. This is the one I have at the Nature Center. We have kids walking past this shrub all summer long. They stop to look at the bees. They stop to listen to the plant hum, and the bees have never bothered a soul there. Hypericum frondosum is about the same size as prolificum. Both of those shrubs with time, get to be up to 4 feet tall, maybe 5 feet wide. The leaves have this pretty gray-green color. After the flowers fade, they just sort of disappear and drop off, but they leave a really cool little seed capsule behind that hangs onto the plant through the winter. I just discovered this past year when I was planting a new area, this plant that's called Hypericum calmianum, and that is actually native farther west around the Great Lakes region. The useful thing about it is it stays quite a lot smaller. It's sort of a rounded shape, maybe only gets to be 2 to 3 feet tall, maybe not even 3 feet, and forms a nice compact shrub, so it can go in a much smaller area, but still has the benefits of the other plants. And all three of the species do this in the fall. They turn sort of multicolored and hang on to the leaves quite late. And when they drop them, those little seed capsules give some winter interest. So check out blog 88 and blog 38 for more on shrubby St. Johnswort. This plant, I have to say, is a little bit new to me in one regard. Diervilla lonacera. I don't have a blog post on this one. I haven't written about it yet. It's called Northern Bush Honeysuckle. And I've had it for years in the backyard under a grove of birches in pretty much full shade. It's in the forward part, so maybe it gets some sun in the midday and afternoon, but not for very long. And I've never been all that impressed with it, to tell you the truth, because it just sort of occupies space. slowly spreads, suckers a little bit, and it gets little yellow flowers on it that you can barely see in this photograph. So not that impressive. But this year, I discovered a cultivar, and I'm excited about this because it looks really cool and it likes full sun. So I've planted it in a new planting in the front of my house that gets blasting sun from the west all afternoon. This cultivar is called Kodiak Orange. One word about cultivars. Cultivar means cultivated variety. If it's a cultivar of a native plant, you'll also hear the word nativar, native variety. And mostly these plants have been sort of fooled around with by horticulturists for particularly desirable traits. Most often size, sometimes time of flowering, more often color of flowers, color of leaves. This one, Kodiak Orange, does this in late summer, which looks really cool if you're planting butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, that bright orange stuff. It's kind of hard to mix with other things, but this looks great with it. And this looks great with St. John's wort I was just talking about, because you get this great sort of yellow-orange thing going. So I'm kind of excited about this plant. And so I thought I would share that with you. I've seen some other cultivars at the nurseries that do different leaf color. The leaf color is sort of with the new leaves rather than the adult leaves, the older leaves. So I don't think it has a dramatically negative impact on leaf-eating insects, but that's a consideration. Next, the late bloomer. Blog 75 is about Clethra ulnifolia, also called summer sweet, for very good reason. As you walk by this plant in full bloom, or if you're really lucky and you have it planted somewhere near a deck or a porch in late summer, by late July, August, on a warm, humid evening, this just makes you think about sipping sweet tea and, you know, listening to music on the porch, watching fireflies. The fragrance of this plant is just this heady perfume. It's absolutely native here, but it seems like it should be a southern plant. I can't recommend it enough. It has 4 great attributes. Besides the unbelievable fragrance and the fact that it blooms in late July or August, pollinators totally love it. The flowers are just beautiful, and they open gradually over a period of a couple of weeks. So you can see the tight buds here. They gradually open from the bottom to the top, releasing that scent. Butterflies just swarm to them because it's full of nectar. And it does really well in almost full shade. The species, Clethra ulnifolia, I've always thought of as a shade plant, and it grows as an understory plant. It's also big, and that's one negative. It can get 5 to 6 feet tall and wide, but it's really nice to have something flowering in pretty deep shade, so I love it for that. But there are new cultivars. This one, Hummingbird, is an example of plants that stay much more compact, heavy bloom, same time, same fragrance, but without the size restrictions. There is, if you like pink, another one of the full-size ones called Ruby Spice. Again, the same fragrance, but this beautiful pink color. And then the last picture show. I really urge you to think about planting witch hazel. This picture was taken in November, and it's just so cool and uplifting to see something blooming at that time of year. It's also, this started blooming on October 30th. I'm just checking my notes here. This photo was taken on October 30th, and it continued to bloom well into November. This plant, witch hazel, I'm sure you've heard of it, as like a skin lotion, witch hazel. The plant was used for that. Native Americans used it to treat skin remedies of all kinds, and the colonists did the same. For some reason, This is just bizarre. They also thought the twigs of this plant were useful for dowsing. They would make those forked sticks to look for water. I don't think there's a lot of scientific basis for that, but it's a quirky part of this plant's history. The medicinal value is still there. It's one of the very few plants that's actually approved by the FDA for medicinal use, and you'll find witch hazel in all kinds of skin lotions and treatments. Probably have some in your medicine cabinet. One of the big mysteries of this plant is how it's pollinated. These little stringy petals conceal true flowers on the inside, but who's around to pollinate this flower in November? Botanists have been debating this now for quite some time. Some people think that there's a little moth that keeps itself warm by beating its wings late into the season. Others think it's pollinated perhaps by a beetle that stays active, awake later into the season. I think it's still not a settled thing, but it's just worth it to have this happening in your yard. I've got it planted here with winterberry and evergreens in the background, and it makes a pretty cool seasonal interest. And I write about witch hazel in blog 9 and 93. More information there. I don't know if I told you that clethra was the subject of blog number 75. Anyway, I hope you'll turn back to those, not as a plug for the Nature Center's website, but just because I put a lot of information in those posts. So one final word about using these native shrubs in landscape design. As I look around southern Westchester suburban yards, it seems that some people think there's a rule that you have to plant along the property lines, just along the property lines, and keep a square lawn or a rectangular lawn and only plant the edges. But there's no such rule. You can make a curve. You can bring plants farther out into the yard. This is, I have property lines on two sides of this, neighbors both to the right and to the left behind there, but you can't see them and they can't see us when we sit on the little bench here enjoying the change of seasons. And I didn't make it a rectangular square. It's a nice curve because that looks more natural, at least to me. You don't have to just use evergreens up against the house for foundation plants. Seems like an awful lot of people believe that they should have evergreens, and then they plant evergreens like boxwood that then they have to cover with burlap because they really can't stand up to winter. So why plant your only winter interest plant and then cover it with burlap? And why plant only evergreens as foundation plants? There's no law. You can plant evergreens like this. I have eastern red cedar, I have viburnum nudum, I have the hypericum, the St. John's wort in here, and I have grasses and perennials and lots of other stuff. And it all works together and it's not, I hope, boring. Why does everybody in Westchester think you can only plant on one side of an entry path? They have entry paths all the way along, and then the shrubs are all tucked up against the house and usually pruned hard. And that's not a rule either. You can plant both sides of an entry walk. And why wouldn't you? It gives you more place to put stuff. So here, I use boxwood. I've got a formal hedge here, but I also have all this other stuff along the path. And as you saw before, it changes with every season. And I think that's really a much better way to use native plants. And if you're really brave and you're not under the strict rules of a homeowners association, you can even plant all the way out into the lawn. I don't mean to sound snarky, but I really do mean to encourage people to think about new places for plants. There are all these fantastic native shrubs, native perennials, ornamental grasses, trees, and we just don't use enough of that space. If we keep planting these landscapes where there is nothing to eat and nowhere to hide, we keep losing our birds, bees, butterflies. And I think most of us, I know all of you involved with Cornell Master Gardeners, don't want that. So I strongly urge you to expand the reach of your plantings. One practical tip, yes, shrubs are more expensive than some other things, but they last longer and they require less work. So my favorite sources for shrubs are some of our better local nurseries. I probably buy most of my things at Rosedale that I buy myself, if you know them, in Elmsford. The Native Plant Center has a partnership with Rosedale, which has actually encouraged Rosedale to carry a much broader and more varied selection of native plants. So I find most of what I need there. This particular planting in my front yard was done by a landscape designer, and I will give him a little plug since I have a couple more minutes. It's called Green Jay Landscaping. Jay Archer is an ecologically minded landscape designer, and he sourced most of these shrubs from 2 or 3 nurseries that specialize in native plants or carry a good selection of them. So there are options. And with that, questions?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. That was wonderful. So if you wanted to close, stop your perfect, and then you can go into the Q&A, and it looks like we've definitely got some questions for you. So So one person said that they love what you're saying, and the plant list. Do you have anywhere that they are all together? And I know you said that you have them on your blog, so.
Yes. I don't have a straight list. Let's see. Now, one plant list I have for perennials, when we did a pollinator garden at the Greenberg Nature Center, we planted a big array of heat and drought tolerant, deer resistant native perennials. That list is available through on the website at the Greenberg Nature Center and in one of my blogs. But all of these plants are discussed at length on the blog. So just go to the index and scroll through it. Some of them are by the specific have. So I have one blog post that's on great shrubs for wet areas. I see, water puddling up in people's yards, and there are shrubs that I haven't talked about here, like buttonbush and winterberry, that are great for soggy areas that take up a lot of water, and they love those circumstances. There are lots of, I've got posts on shade gardening and on plants that like hot, dry areas next to walkways where the soil is poor. So one thing, that book I mentioned right at the beginning, Doug Tallamy's book, the index in Doug's book was the most indispensable resource for me when I was just starting out learning about native plants. He has lists of trees, shrubs, perennials, ornamental grasses, ground covers, vines for each region of the US. And that's a great place to start looking for those plants. So scroll down his list and then research those individual plants.
Yeah, and we definitely have some fact sheets on the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Westchester's website as well.
Yeah.
So using them all together is always really helpful to kind of see
Also,
what you got.
the Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College has native plant lists, and so does Planting Westchester by Westchester County.
Yeah, and there's a couple questions about certain plants and if you have a blog post on them. But as you said, you have a table of contents in the beginning, so if they're looking for a specific plant, they can just go there to see what you have blogs on.
Yes. So we did them chronologically, mostly for reasons having to do with the website, but it is actually pretty easy. I think there are 98 blogs right now, but if you go to that index, you can just absolutely scroll through, and each one of them is a hyperlink. So if you see a shrub that you're interested in or a subject you're interested in, click on it, will take you right to that blog post. So it's really pretty easy to navigate. What else do I want to say? Yeah.
Great. And then we have another question. I've heard that some insects need both a certain tree and a certain shrub to complete their life cycle. Do you know of a reference that lists which shrubs are needed?
Um,
Or does it even really
so
matter in your opinion, is the other half of that one?
most of our caterpillars, which are the best bird food, need a specific family of plants. Some trees actually are available in shrub form. For example, white pine is the host to, I don't know, 20 some species of caterpillars, which is weird considering pine needles. And maybe you don't want to plant a 100-foot white pine in your yard that will drop a big branch on your house someday, understandably. But there are dwarf white pines, and they provide the same food resource for those caterpillars, but they're small and make a great foundation plant. I actually have a blog post on that, one of the most recent ones, on evergreens. So that I know. The most important sources for most caterpillars are trees. And there's one of the blog posts that I have on the best trees for caterpillars also. And by far, I think if you know Doug Tallamy at all, you know that the top performing plant in all of our landscapes are oaks. So oak trees host over 350 species of caterpillars and are caterpillar factories all summer long. So the birds hang out there because that's where they find what they need for their chicks.
Awesome. And we have another question about the viburnum. We have a couple about the viburnum. So the viburnum that you spoke about, how insect resistant is it? Which I guess also is
Okay.
no, nothing is truly resistant, just less likely, right?
Okay. I like Viburnum nudum because I have not seen it be hit by insects that damage the leaves. The leaves are thick, shiny, and tough. I have planted without success arrowwood viburnum, which is one of our native viburnums, should be a great plant. But there is a bug called the viburnum leaf beetle, which I'm not 100% positive, but I suspect is a non-native bug. Most of our native plants have resistance to most insects, which is why they become special. The plants don't want to be eaten. The insects need something to eat. So they balance each other out. So when we bring in an insect from another continent, that's not the case. And our plants very often don't have resistance to that. That's what's happened to our dogwoods and to a lot of other plants. The viburnum leaf beetle, I'm not 100% sure about, but I have planted and failed with arrowwood viburnum. I've had good luck with viburnum trilobum, maple leaf viburnum, gorgeous fall color, nice flowers, good value for insects. That one does really well. But those are the two I stick with. I also have not seen deer hit viburnum nudum, but I believe my maple leaf viburnum is more protected. I'm not sure about that deer resistance.
Sure. And we have about 3 minutes left, so I will just say real fast, everyone who is here, thank you so much. And Cathy, thank you so much for your presentation. And a reminder, please remember to sign up for next month, Gardening in Small Spaces with Judah Rosansky. It's happening on April 9th at 10 a.m. But Cathy, do you mind staying on an extra couple of minutes to go through the questions?
I'm happy to.
Awesome. So the next question is, what do you suggest as a ground cover around newly planted shrubs?
Um, I think bark mulch is okay around shrubs and trees. Much better is understory plants. So if I'm planting a new shrub, in that first year, I think using sort of the standard bark mulch is fine. I don't mulch around perennials because it actually inhibits their growth and holds water up to their crowns and actually causes them to rot. So I've sort of stopped mulching. I used to be religious about it, and I don't do it anymore. The first choice would be shredded leaves. So if you're doing fall planting of shrubs, which is a good time to plant shrubs, using the leaves on your property chopped up a little bit and covering all of the soil around the shrubs with leaves is a great idea. Bark mulch is good for protecting, and having something around the shrubs and trees is good for protecting them from lawnmowers. If you have a lawn crew that is, less than careful. So I would do that. After a few years, I really like to underplant my shrubs and trees, because that's what we call a soft landing. All of the insects that live in or use the leaves and live there tend to drop and hide in the soil. Fireflies hide in the soil. Many of our native bees hide in the soil. And if you put shredded bark mulch there, that gets in the way of all of those processes and makes it difficult for those insects to survive. So I would use bark mulch if I have to in the first season to prevent weeds, which is worthwhile. But if I have access to shredded leaves, or if I can plant right away with native ground covers, I would prefer that.
Awesome, thank you. And so there's a couple of questions asking for specific suggestions in certain situations where people are replacing hedges with native shrubs or shade loving, things of that nature. Can you just talk about where they could go about finding some kind of information like this, where how they should go about kind of designing what they want to put in?
Yes. I've done it by a huge amount of trial and error, but I also, read voraciously about this stuff. I think the indexes that I've mentioned to you are a good place to start, and then, look for a little more information about the plant. For example, hedge. I have a blog post called "A Better Hedge." Everywhere you look, you see arborvitaes planted shoulder to shoulder and lopped off at the top. Arborvitae are native and they're fine plants, but I just think it's sort of too common and not useful enough. You can do so much better. You can find more attractive hedges and more useful hedges. So I mentioned 2 plants today that actually make pretty good hedges, although they're deciduous, not evergreen. And I think you can find information about that again with Doug's plant list, Doug Tallamy, at the back of Bringing Nature Home, Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College, and Planting Westchester, and my blogs. So I think those are good resources. And if I'm ever researching a new plant, I should make this plug. When I'm looking up something about a plant I don't know, or if I have a question about a plant, I use Google and I put the plant name in. And the first thing that comes up now is an AI overview, which is not reliable. Sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not. But if you scroll down and choose your sources for information, my favorite source of information will be Missouri Botanical Garden, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, certain writers like Doug Tallamy, other bloggers that you'll find, North Carolina Extension, Westchester, Planting Westchester, and Cornell Master Gardeners. I use Cornell's information, especially Cornell ornithology, for what plants birds like, but I would start that way.
Definitely, and that's something that we can absolutely help with here at Westchester Extension. So you can always reach out, email, give us shoot us a
Absolutely.
phone call, anything like that.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of questions about how to access your blog. I put that in the chat, so anyone who needs some to be able to access that, if you go into the chat, you'll be able to find it. And
Let me make one
yeah.
other comment about that. So naturecentergb.org is the main website. The blog is always on the homepage. And right at the bottom of that is a word that says, if you're looking for something specific, check out the index, click on that, and that's an active link to the whole long list of posts. Next to that, there's an opportunity to subscribe to the blog, If you do that, I promise you, you will not get all the mail from the Greenberg Nature Center. You will only get the blog. And it will come to your email address whenever it comes out, which is usually every couple of weeks, sometimes more often, sometimes less. But subscribing to it is a good way to stay in touch with all of the stuff on native plants.
Awesome. And we have two more questions, one quick one. What was the name of Doug Tallamay's book that you were talking about in the beginning?
Bringing Nature Home. And I always have it on my shelf within reach.
Oh,
It's Doug's first book. He has another one that I really also recommend, which is called Nature's Best Hope, which is really about the importance of transforming suburban landscapes into native plant habitats, because we have something like 22 million acres of lawn in the United States, which is worthless for biodiversity. And if everybody just gave half of their lawn to native plantings, we would have as much native habitat as we have in, like, combining 2/3 of all of our national parks. So Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope are both excellent, excellent resources.
awesome. And finally, can you just go over a little bit what you said about the non-native lace cap hydrangeas in the
Yes,
presentation?
yes. That was a blog post that I wrote, blog number 89, because I had an upsetting experience. I was walking along and saw some very obviously non-native hydrangeas. They were bright fuchsia colored, big lace cap shape, the kind that have a lot of little flowers in the middle, and then an array around in a ring of those 4-petaled flowers. And there were bees all over it. And I went, oh, wait a minute, that's a non-native hydrangea, and the bees are loving it. And then I started really looking around my garden, other people's gardens. At Untermeyer Conservant Garden, they have a whole hydrangea row. And some of the plants get tons of bee action and some of them don't. And it's not native versus non-native, it's the shape of the flower. Are like Annabelle hydrangeas have been cultivated and selected to make that great big ball shape by favoring all of the little outside flowers at the total expense of the inside flowers, which is where the pollen is. So bees don't get anything out of those big ball-shaped flowers, whether it's the Asian mophead, the big blue ones everybody loves, me too, or the great big white Annabelle hydrangeas, and they have other cultivars, Incredible, Invincible, they all have names like that. They're ball-shaped. So the ball-shaped hydrangeas, whether they're native or non-native, are useless for bees. The lace cap and the conical shaped hydrangeas are valuable because they're loaded with those inside flowers that have all the pollen. So in blog 89, I discussed that at length. But that was a little bit of a surprise for me this past summer.